Very warm welcome to TheSpiritGuides.co.uk network radio. Tonight we've got on Dr. Andrew Silverman, who was on here before, discussing the Shroud of Turin with Nigel Kerner, who was a previous guest, talking about the grey aliens and basically around what they're here and what they're up to. We did cover at the end of the show, briefly really, the research around the Shroud of Turin. So really I wanted to get Andrew back on to sort of dig deeper really on this topic. Just like to start off getting a bit of background around how you got into it, and really what you do really. I know you're a doctor. What got you involved in this work?
Well, about 30 years ago, actually, when I was a friend of Nigel's son. Actually, I visited Nigel's place in South London, and I saw he had this photo on the wall, which caught my eye. This print of the photographic negative of the Turin Shroud, and I was asking him about what it was, and I found it really fascinating that this, ancient piece of cloth should have such a perfect photograph on it, way before cameras were even invented, and it fascinated me. And actually, even back then, Nigel did have some ideas about it, about what it meant and what it might represent. That really sort of set like a seed crystal in my mind, if you like, of that later as I became older and learned a bit more about science and so on. And it really I began to think about these things that he'd said to me, way back then. And it began to fit into what I think is quite a rational sort of hypothesis to account for what caused the image to form. And that basically, I heard that there was this conference in Italy, which was an international symposium of scientists who have basically spent decades studying the shroud, and I thought, why don't I try and present it to them? And it was sort of really most of them were far more qualified than I am in science, in the sense of theoretical science, in the sense that there's professors of physics there, and there was a statistician and textile experts, botanists, and historians and philosophers and so on. And basically, I just thought this is a chance to sort of put across to them these ideas that I had, and I was expecting that they were going to shoot me down, and people would try and perhaps show that there might have been some flaws there, but actually it did seem to hold water. The physicists there, they weren't really contradicting any of the ideas that I was putting forward. In fact, there was one professor who was really fascinated with the connection to Schrödinger and some of the quotes that I had raised there, and the people who suggested ways of taking things a bit further. I mean, really, I suppose that was back in the early 1980s when I first saw the picture, and then of course there was the carbon dating towards the late 1980s, after which there were a lot of people who thought that maybe it's not genuine after all. But I mean, there were some reservations about this. Okay, if it had been medieval, how did a medieval forger produce this artifact, which we don't know how to make, even using 21st century or then 20th century technology? And even in the same article of Nature where the carbon dating study was published, there was a letter from Professor Phillips from Harvard, the High Energy Physics Lab, saying that actually the only way we can account for how this image got there was by a burst of radiant energy that came from the dead body that the shroud wrapped, and that can affect carbon-14 levels, and this was a carbon-14 dating. He was suggesting further tests that could be done, but it seems that the church have sort of kept all the evidence with them, and they won't release more of the shroud to be tested, unfortunately. But then the big breakthrough came sort of in the soon after the turn of the millennium, with some wonderful work that was done by Benford and Marino, where they actually this was a couple in America that noticed that when they looked at a sample that had been taken from near the carbon dating sample, called the raised sample, that it actually looked like two bits of cloth put together. And they said, hang on a minute, we know that patches had been sewn in by the nuns and after the fire damage. What if this corner of the cloth, which is where it had been held, and which, incidentally, all the protocols about carbon dating say you have to avoid the areas where there's been direct contact, because that's where you get contamination. But it's where it would have been held, where it would have been most damaged, and actually where bits had been previously chopped off for people to sell as relics and so on. Well, how about if the patch had been sewn in afterwards? And they put this idea forward and there was a very respected expert called Raymond Rogers, who's a chemist who was on the original STURP, Shroud of Turin research project, and he said he was a scientist through and through, and he was really, about, only that you should believe something if the evidence backs it up, not just go for what you want to believe. And when he first heard the carbon dating, he thought, okay, then it's medieval. And when he heard people challenging this, he said, right, I'm going to prove them wrong. So he said, I'm going to do the test and see if this could have been a reweave. And he ended up coming out and admitting, I intended to prove them wrong. I ended up proving them right. This is a reweave. It's the part that was carbon dated was a mixture of 1st century cloth with a 16th century patch that the nuns had sewn in, and actually it accounts for why the various labs came up with different dates. Even the statistics say that it shouldn't have been that far out, because they had different proportions of the reweave in there. So that was that. Now, all the evidence to me points to it having been actually, as is claimed, to have dated from around 2,000 years ago and not 700 years ago. But the question is, how did the image get there? If you look at the cloth, the image is what we call a surface phenomenon. It's only on the surface fibers of the cloth. It's not painted on. If it had been painted or there were pigment to put it on there, then you would see that the fibers would be stuck together by the pigment that had soaked through, and you would see that it was deeper than just the surface. But what you actually find when you do chemical analysis of the parts that have the image is that all that has changed is that the cellulose, which forms part of the linen of the cloth, on the very topmost fibers, that's less than a human hair's thickness, have actually changed in their chemical structure. And the only way that we can do this artificially, if you like, is you can make a similar thing happen with ultraviolet lasers. And there's some great research that was done by Dr. Di Lazzaro, who works at the an atomic institute in one of the first, actually, which is in near Rome. And he found that you can actually form a similar effect on the cellulose using ultraviolet laser. But to actually do this with an artist, even if it had been some medieval artist who somehow had lasers, you would have needed thousands upon thousands of lasers to actually form the image, and you'd have to have done each spot separately. But the only way that we can actually explain how the image got there, it involves one other factor, which is that it was discovered back in the 70s that it's unique amongst all photographic imprints in that it has perfect distance coded information, which implies that the light that formed the image on the cloth wasn't reflected off the body of the man. It actually came from the body of the man, that this dead body somehow shone brighter than the sun for a tiny fraction, about less than 1,000 millionth of a second, and that's what actually formed the image. Now, it was only actually around the turn of at the end of the 19th century, around 1898, when photography was first developed, that the interest in the shroud really began to take off, because someone was commissioned by the church to take a photo of it, a chap called Secondo Pia. And when he took the picture, he had the negative of the shroud image. Then he, as I was saying last time, he nearly fainted when he looked at the negative, because the negative of the shroud is actually a perfect positive. In other words, the shroud image itself is a negative, which again fits with this radiation hypothesis or radiance hypothesis. So the other scientists who had done actually the hard empirical work of putting the work in and showing that, how the cloth could have been changed by the radiation or the radiance from the body, then what my talk was about was to put forward a suggestion, if you like, a speculation for people to consider and see what they thought about how does that happen? How does a dead body shine brighter than the sun? Now, the interesting thing about this is that we have to sort of consider, who was this man that actually formed the image? And then when the forensic pathologists who have looked at it and all the other scientists, it's a bit like a sort of CSI, if you like. They're looking at all the evidence and trying to piece together what actually happened. And looking at the evidence from, for example, pollen grains that have been found on the shroud, it's been found that it had to have been in around the Jerusalem area and had to have been there around March or April for it to have got the certain pollens that are only found in that area, and that come out at that time of year. And so then who is this person that's shown? Well, it shows the body of a man that had been tortured. He'd been whipped very cruelly with and if you look closely at the marks that were made by the whip, the sort of archaeology, the forensic pathologists can fit it exactly to what they have that they've recovered of a Roman whips from around that time that were called flagrum, that actually had these three round metal balls on them that were designed to inflict maximum pain and injury. And they can find exactly the marks from these, that he'd been whipped many, many, many times, and there's even the blood flow from each of those separate marks. So he'd been whipped. He'd been had a sharp object like a cap of thorns had been placed on top of his head, and there was blood coming down from there. And then his wrists and his feet had been impaled in a crucifixion position. And interestingly, in medieval times, all the depictions of crucifixion show the nails through the hands, but modern anatomists and forensic pathologists know that wouldn't have worked. It would have got the weight of the body would have just torn right through. It would have had to have been the wrists, exactly as it is on the shroud. And in fact, if you have the nails through the wrists, it goes through a nerve which anatomists call the median nerve, which when you stimulate it, such as by sticking a nail into it, for example, would make the thumb move across the palm of the hand, so that as you actually see on the shroud image, you can't see the thumbs because they're hidden behind the hand because of this effect that would have happened on his median nerve. Now, if you look at the flow of blood from the wrists, it exactly follows the positions that the man would have been in crucifixion, in two positions, one where he's hanging and one where he's pulling himself up to to breathe, if you like, and it actually shows both. It's just, I mean, I could go on for hours just about the physical evidence on the shroud that points to it. Interestingly, being a unique thing that fits with the historical character who was known then as was, we believe, Yeshua Ben Yosef, he would have been called, because that's the Hebrew Aramaic version of the name, and it fits exactly with what happened, and even down to the piercing of the side of his body. And the mixture of fluids there, because the sort of pleural fluid mixed with blood from where he'd been stabbed there, and this is knowledge of anatomy that goes way past, even what people like Leonardo had. And interestingly, the shroud is known to have been exhibited as the shroud, way before Da Vinci was even born. So, I mean, much as I respect his genius and I love his art, this is something that I really don't believe that Da Vinci could have done, and modern scientists and artists still can't do now in the 20th century. So then we were left with this conundrum, if you like. Okay, so this seems to identify the man whose image is on the cloth as being the historical Jesus. Is it just coincidence that this unique event in human history, where, as far as we know, unique at least, where a dead body shone brighter than the sun, is actually fitting in with the historical nature of the one human being who has had the most impact in many ways in human history? And I'd like to make it very clear at this point that I'm not saying this in any sense in any religious way at all. I mean, for me, what Jesus taught and how he lived, they sort of speak for themselves. Whatever any church might do or claim to do in his name. And sometimes, sometimes some terrible things have been done in history by churches, but that's not him doing it. This is just people doing it, claiming to be in his name. And if you actually look at his attitude towards organized religion, in a sense, he did have a great sort of reverence for what it represented, if you like, this central ethic relating to what he called the father of all mankind, if you like, and in the sense that when he went into the temple, he was awestruck and so disappointed with the way that human beings had what they had done to a message, and how they had distorted it to suit their own needs. And to be honest, I think he might well be the same if he went into a modern church. Interestingly, although I'm not aligned to any denomination of religion, but I've got a good friend who's a Catholic priest who himself admits that actually what Jesus was saying back then to the Sanhedrin, he might well be saying now to the modern church. And in fact, he's told his congregation as much, that hypocrisy hasn't gone away really. But I'm sort of diverting a little bit from the shroud topic. I mean, as I say, the fascinating thing is there a connection between what he taught and how he lived his life and this image on the cloth? And this is where something that Nigel actually wrote about in a manuscript of a book that he hasn't yet published, but I'm really looking forward to being published, hopefully at some point in the future. He was talking about a connection between mind and matter, in which he put forward this suggestion, speculation if you like, but it makes a lot of sense to me, that what if matter is simply frozen light? And what if light is frozen thought? So in that sense, matter itself is frozen thought. Now, at first sight, or first hearing, that sounds like a bit of a bizarre thing to say. That we think of thought as something that arises out of an arrangement of atoms. So you have a brain, and that makes thinking. But interestingly, quantum theory actually, in many ways, suggests the opposite, more aligned to what Nigel was saying. In that, it says that the observer has to exist, has to be there as a conscious observer in order for matter to be real at all in the first place. So that until you actually look at something, if it's an electron or an atom or whatever, it doesn't actually exist in any given state at all. It's just possibilities, potentials. And those potentials become real through being experienced or observed. And this is where the listeners may want to look this up on the internet for more sort of detail about it if they're curious about it. But about Schrödinger's cat, this idea that until someone looks into the box, the cat is neither alive nor dead. It's somehow both. That of course, this doesn't allow for the possibility that the cat itself might have consciousness, but it's just showing the basic principle that it's consciousness that makes something be in a particular state as opposed to being in lots of possible states all at once. And you can actually do experiments, and they've been being done for many decades in quantum theory, that actually demonstrate that this is actual fact, that actually an electron can go two ways at once until you actually measure it, and you can actually prove that it could have done. And depending on how much you can know about it from looking at it, that influences what it can be. Again, I won't go into too much scientific detail, but it's all out there if anyone wants to look it up.
Because in a way, do you feel that if there's no observers in this reality, then it would collapse?
For it to be a reality, reality implies that it has to be experienced as real, and this is something that Schrödinger pointed out, actually, that he took it a bit further than just saying it sort of relates to subatomic particles and so on. He said, hang on a minute, this actually includes not just matter, but space and time themselves. So there's a fascinating thing, and I'm sort of paraphrasing him here, but the fascinating thing about mind is that mind is always, in quotes, now. The word now, that we have a present tense. The equations in science, as Einstein pointed out, would imply that past, present, and future, they're just relative. That actually the whole kit and caboodle, if you like, the whole universe from Big Bang to heat death or cold death, it's all much of a muchness. There's nothing to make any particular moment privileged to be now, or to even have a concept of now, or to have this idea that time is flowing, or that, what was past and what is now present will be past, and what is future will then be present. These ideas of moving through time, these are all subjective. The equations don't actually speak about these at all. And yet, as conscious observers, we all experience them every single moment, by definition, for it to be a moment. And what Schrödinger pointed out is that actually, we're not just making the electron real, we're making time real. And what does that mean? If time is the product of mind, he reasoned, then mind can't be a product of time, logically. And it makes sense that it fits then that the mind cannot have begun at any moment in time, and also no moment in time can be its undoing. It cannot end, because to end means it's changing in time, but time is only there because the mind was there to make it so. And so a wonderful conclusion derives from this, that actually mind is eternal. And that means that everybody is, everyone, if you like, interestingly the distinction between everyone and everybody, but everyone is eternal. Our bodies aren't eternal. our bodies begin, we're conceived, and that's when our bodies start as us. And then we're born, we live our lives, our bodies die. But the mind cannot die according to that. And this fits in a wonderful way with some research that's been done by, and this is research being done by physicians and scientists into the near-death experience. I had the privilege to meet a great scientist and neuropsychiatrist by the name of Dr. Peter Fenwick a few years back, and he's done some wonderful research into this. And I actually showed him the manuscript of the book I was talking about that Nigel has written, and he found it fascinating. He's done some research that shows that when the brain stops, as in a cardiac arrest situation, in many instances the people have this experience of being outside of their body, their mind being outside their body, looking at what's happening. Now, this is even blind people have had this experience, and they've had it when the brain waves are completely flat, and they've been able to describe details that are very specific to their own particular resuscitation that they couldn't have known about unless they'd been conscious to witness it while their brain had stopped. And the conclusion that many researchers are coming to from this is that actually the mind doesn't need the brain to exist. Now, not to say we don't use our brains, and they're not vital while we're physically alive. And as a doctor, I would do what I can to help people keep their brains healthy and so on. But it's also always with the perspective that while we may as doctors always try our best to obviously we work on improving quality of life, and also we try and protect people's lives and cure diseases and so on, and I would always continue doing that. I would never support suicide or euthanasia or anything like that, because I don't believe anyone can know when another person's or their own best time to die is. So despite the fact that we're always trying to do this, at the back of my mind is this sense that even then when we do die, that actually it's not the end. And actually a lot of Fenwick's work and similar research that has been done by psychologists in collaboration with Buddhist scientists, for example, is to be found in a lot of hospices up and down the country, where people and Fenwick makes this point that we need to go more in medical training to look at more the sort of spiritual side of man, not just the mechanical side of man. But that being the case, to come back to the shroud again, how does this fit into the image on the shroud? Well, the one other thing that just one more quote I'd like to make from Schrödinger, not to try and labour the point too much, but if we're eternal, if we didn't have a beginning, but the universe did have a beginning, and the universe had a beginning when everything was all one, all together, with no space, time, or matter, if you like, well, what does that mean? It means that we were once all together in a timeless state. And that timeless state, if it's timeless, means in a sense we are still all together. And yet we're living in this separated out physical universe. How does that work? How does that happen? Well, the one thing that science looks at in most cases is this linear cause and effect relationship between what happens and what happened before, where force determines what happens. You kick a football, you feel if you kick it hard, you feel a hard push on your toe where you kicked it. Its action is equal and opposite reaction, and you make a change happen in the ball, so it moves. A force acts, and it makes change. Now, at the beginning, before a physical universe happened, there was no matter, space, or time. There was no force. Now, what then would cause anything to happen from within that state? Now, interestingly, if force is what makes things happen, that have to happen in the way that the force dictates, is there the possibility that there's another effect that determines what happens, which is non-force, if you like, the opposite of force? And I believe there is such a thing, and I think actually, in a way, most, if not all, human beings believe that it's there because we're using it every single day of our lives, and we call it free choice. To have free will implies that nothing forces you to make the decision that you made. It implies that you made it freely, and your choice that you have chosen is the cause. It's a prime cause, as philosophers would call it. It's a beginning cause rather than being caused by something else. So in that sense, what if, from this altogether state, what if we had actually chosen to experience separation from the separate point of view? In so doing, the only way you can have separation, you have to have space. Space is simply the separation of points. And if that thought to be separate is what, if you like, crystallizes into matter through light, and light, interestingly, is again, I won't go into too much detail here, but people can look this up in something called the time dilation equation. Light is in many ways, the speed of light is, if you like, the interface between our temporal timely state of existence, if you like, and the eternal state of existence. And at the Big Bang, we know that originally there was nothing in the sense of no thing. And then there was what the scientists refer to as a photon-dominated universe, light, if you like. And then there was matter, and matter in separation, making an expanding universe. Everything moves apart. So what Nigel was suggesting in his manuscript is actually that the universe was set in motion not by a creator God, like on the Sistine Chapel, this big white man in the sky pointing his finger, making things happen. That's our anthropomorphized, making God in the image of man, and only some men at that. No, this is the final of all absolutes that implies the total potential of what all human beings can achieve and have come from. In total potential of all knowingness, if you like, because if it's all one, and if each of us has our own little bit of the puzzle, our own little way of knowing, if it was all one and it had no limitations because it had no space or time to be limited in, it had to be all knowing. What if we chose to come away from that, and in so doing we made this momentum of separation that made what scientists refer to as the second law of thermodynamics? Everything breaks apart, everything goes into more and more states of chaos and brokenness, and that would manifest itself in human qualities, in our minds, of things like selfishness, materialism, nationalism, racism, all these isms that divide, basically, that try to that miss our true nature. And this is perhaps what great teachers like the Buddha and Jesus and others were talking about by saying things like, love your neighbor as yourself. It's not a platitude to be goody-goody. It's actually a simple mathematical statement of fact. Listen, guys, your neighbor is yourself. You're all one. Wake up. It's not like you think it is. You're seeing the world through a very distorted lens. It's not what you think. You're all one. And this actually fits, interestingly, with a lot of people's experience in their near-death experiences when they have their what's known as a life review. That they often see a being that's with them, that's guiding them, but it's not judging them. It's just guiding them through what they're experiencing, and they experience their lives and what they've done, and often they experience them from the point of view of the other person. So anything they did kindly towards another person, they feel that kindness coming towards them. Anything they did spiteful or harmful towards another person, they feel what that was like to have it happen to you. And this is giving a clue to the fact that actually, fundamentally, we are all one in the basic nature of what we are as human beings, as conscious beings. You can define it by two paradigms, if you like, the input and the output, if you like. There's awareness, that's how we know anything, and will, which is what we do. And all that's different between different individuals is what we're aware of, what memories we have, our individual patterns of memory and knowing and awareness and understanding, and actions and what we actually do, how we use our will. But fundamentally, those two principles are the same. All that's different is what we write on it. And Nigel's speculation is that what we call a soul, for want of a better word, and I don't think he likes that word much better than I do. It sort of clouds things in a sense, because it sort of brings all kinds of religious connotations on it that aren't needed and aren't often meant. That actually all that is a summary of these patterns of the writing that we've made, the writing in shadow, if you like, that we've made on that light. Once we take all that away, once we take all the ego and restrictions away, so that it's just light, so that it's not limited, then there's nothing to demarcate self from other, if you like. We would all be one. And, Jesus often referred to himself as the Son of Man, and he referred to God as being the Father. He said, "You're our Father," talking to everyone. So, and he said, is it not written, "You are God"? So he was always actually trying to show the potential of all human beings, that they could actually, and he actually said as much, that they can do anything that he does, any human being is capable of doing, even better than he did, that human beings are capable of doing. So these aren't the words of someone who was after power or was after anything for himself. He was always trying to show the grandeur and potential and size of all human beings, so that we could recognize it in ourselves, perhaps. Now, to come back to the shroud image, if the separation at the beginning of the universe that actually coalesced atoms out of light from this initial thought through these momentums that separate, what if you could reverse that? What if you could live a life that was always acting out of compassion and caring in wise ways to point out the ways that you can actually achieve the unionizing, if you like, to cast aside all the limited, restricted ways of looking at things that just limit you into ignorance, basically. And I mean, interestingly, the word that he spoke about in terms of change, that was translated from the Aramaic to the Greek, and then the Greek to all the other languages. In English, we called it repent. It came from the Greek root metanoite, which, of course, as many people already know, that literally just means change your mind. It doesn't mean you pay money to someone or say 100 Hail Marys or sort of torture yourself to make yourself suffer and feel guilty. It just says, if you've been thinking in a way that limits you, understand that and undo that limitation and see the broader picture, see it for what it is. And if you can see through that all human beings have limitless capability. And there's an interesting analogy of this that actually, again, Nigel pointed out to me a long time ago, that all you need to do is a little demonstration of this for oneself, is to look out at the night sky, and you can see billions upon billions of little dots of light. Each of them are stars or galaxies that you can see shining in the distance, and planets. Now, all of those are contained in your mind's eye, if you like. You're aware of that whole thing. And yet none of it, except for if any of it contains life, like you do, none of the deadness of it, of galaxies or whatever, none of them can know you or can know themselves or can know anything. So just in that one illustration, you can see the hugeness and immensity of any one human being. And it fits with what Schrödinger was saying as well, that even the whole of time and space, and it all comes down to any one sentient individual is capable of making that real or not. Now, the point about the shroud and the point about the man who formed it is that he was showing a way that was countervailing to this entropic drift that was separating. All the time he was uniting at each moment. And what if the tension, if you like, the force in our atoms is the result of our restriction. And as we undo that restriction, then we begin to loosen the bonds, if you like. The analogy the way I like to see it is like a knot that is tight, and you undo that knot. As you loosen it, it begins to cut. The knot begins to come apart. But it's different to what happens in particle accelerators and so on, where you just point a flamethrower at the knot, and you just get lots of little bits of ash coming out of it, which are little particles. But this is actually undoing it. And an interesting point that I mentioned at my talk was that if you were to release all the matter as light from the dead body of a man, then physicists might well raise the question, but hang on a minute, that would even an atom bomb releases only a tiny amount of matter. Interestingly, the amount of matter, if you released all the matter from a mustard seed as energy, that would be enough energy to move a mountain, interestingly enough, from E equals mc squared. So you can see how huge amount of energy is contained in a tiny bit of matter, but that's releasing it as in the way of burning the knot, if you like. What if you're actually undoing the tension of it? Now, this tied in with something that Stephen Hawking actually wrote in his book, Brief History of Time, that scientists quite rightly are quite stuck to this idea of the conservation of energy, that you don't just make energy out of nothing or destroy it completely and it disappears rather than coming into another form. What Hawking said is, actually that's true, but it's not a contradiction with the universe coming from nothing, because with all the force and tension of the universe, gravity cancels it all out, the gravity in the universe. So what it then suggests then is that if you can reduce the force where you are, if you can reduce the tension where you are, remember we're saying force is the product of this initial separation, this restriction, this limitation. If you can undo it by becoming freer, remember we're saying that freedom happens where force is less. So if you can reduce it, then perhaps you start to reduce gravity. And this would fit in a wonderful way in certain anecdotal reports, and not just anecdotal in terms of the Shroud, because we've got physical evidence for it, but that for example, the Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha, was seen to rise above the ground at certain points after he was enlightened. And there was someone called Teresa of Avila who was also said to have risen above the ground. And Jesus himself was reported to have risen above the ground. Now, some research done by one of my colleagues who was at this conference, Dr. Gilbert Lavoie, another physician, actually shows that if you look at the image on the cloth, the image was formed while the body wasn't lying down flat on the slab with the back of it being pressed flat against the slab. It was actually vertical. It was vertical and not even standing. It was suspended above the air. You can tell from the image on the feet, and you can tell from the fact that the back of the body isn't compressed and flattened against the slab, and also that the hair is coming down vertically rather than backwards behind the head. So that would fit with he was reducing force, so he was reducing gravity. So his release of light from his body wasn't a huge explosion. It was just a shining, if you like, of this bright light that coming from every single millimeter of his body that actually formed the image on the cloth. Now, interestingly, there's three components to what you can see on the cloth. There's marks that have been made there by a fire in around I think the 16th century, and then patches were sewn in after that by the nuns to cover those areas, and there was water that was spilt on it at that time. Then there's red marks on it, which for a long time people were speculating what are those red marks, and those have been analysed, and they've been found to be male human blood, which provisionally we're saying looks like it's group AB. We're not totally sure of the blood group because apparently archaeologists have pointed out that that the blood group can change. That with time, if you leave blood exposed, it might look to be AB if it wasn't. But anyway, it's male human blood is on the blood marks that are on the shroud, and they're not just painted on as blood. They've actually come off by direct contact from the body of the man, and interestingly, from looking at the pattern of the blood stains, you can see that that they would have gone on the body while it was wrapped around the face, for example, and then when the actual image was formed, remember it's got perfect distance coded information, the cloth would have been flat, like it was just sort of suspended there, if you like a flat sheet in front of and behind the body, and because the blood marks that would have gone on there when it was on his face are now imprinted where the image is showing his hair. And this is another point that Lavoie made, that actually the cloth must have been flat. So he was vertical, he was suspended above the ground, and he was shining brighter than the sun. Now, I mean, for many people, this could well fit with this being an actual sort of photographic evidence, if you like, of two things that are referred to in historical reports of the time. One is this idea of the resurrection, the empty tomb, that they came back and found the tomb empty apart from the shroud. The other is this phenomenon known as the transfiguration, which is where he actually demonstrated this earlier on in his life, where he took three of his friends up a mountain and said to have risen above the ground. And again, the words say that he shone brighter than the sun, which is what the scientists and the physicists are now saying that he would have had to have done to get the imprint on the cloth. So what this is perhaps suggesting is that there is a way that human beings have the potential to actually completely overcome everything material in this world. And of course, Nigel in his books refers to this alien phenomenon, which is basically in some ways he says you can see it as a metaphor, if you like. Look at where our science is going now and technology is going, that our materialism is going, that basically people have this idea that robots or machines or computers can do things better than people can, and people have this idea that you can the way to because they've lost sight of this idea of the mind as a non-physical thing being eternal. So they don't want to end. They don't when they die, but they think they're going to end. So they want to somehow download their minds, because they see their minds in a sort of very naive way, if you like, as being like software, that somehow download that into a machine and then send the machine out into space, and that's how you continue. That's what Arthur C. Clarke wrote about. Now, it seems Nigel actually, well, he knew him personally, and apparently Arthur Clarke actually sort of went back on that in later times, this idea, but he did write about this in his younger times, this idea that was the way for human beings to survive, because we know that the earth isn't going to last forever, isn't going to sustain humanity forever, and so he saw mankind surviving into the stars by in a sort of robotic sense. Now, of course, anyone with any common sense, even knowledge of what a mind is, of what awareness is, will know that you can't do that. You can't upload your mind into a machine. I mean, if you had a certain program, software in a computer that made it have something that was a parody of your memories, would it be a crime of murder to unplug the computer? There's no mind, there's no sentience, there's no awareness to make that come alive, if you like. There's no ghost in the machine to actually experience any of that. And in quantum terms, it's not an observer. So, I mean, if we accept what astronomers are predicting, that there are actually many planets even just, let alone in our galaxy, let alone the whole universe, that are capable of sustaining life, then some of them will probably have done this, but done it with attempted to do this with robots, but to a much higher level of technology than we're capable of, and that these kind of things would be programmed to try and continue as long as they can, and they would recognize that actually, if they're able to recognize in a human being that there's something unique there, a little fingerprint, if you like, of an individual mind line connecting back to the beginning of the universe, then if a person dies and then they see that pattern coming back again, if you like, akin to reincarnation, which again a lot of researchers are coming to the conclusion that this is probably true, because these past life memories that people have that can be verified that they couldn't have known about. And it makes sense if what Schrödinger said is true, that the mind doesn't end, and if we still have our restrictions, so we can't just coalesce back to that original light that we all came from, then where do we go? And it would make sense that perhaps we do come out. If they see that, then they can see a way of continuing, if you like, that they don't have, but that they would like to get hold of. And that's where his idea of sort of piggybacking onto it comes from, with trying to make imprint human beings with their technology in such a way that they, in their ignorant, well, it's not even ignorant, because to be ignorant you have to be sentient, but in their uninformed way, they think is going to, or the program would suggest, is going to give them some kind of continuance. Well, that were the case, it would fit, as we were saying, with the fascinating story, which is also reported in the New Testament, that this creature took Jesus, that's known as as Satan, which is a mythological character who is said to have fallen from the sky at one point, which is interesting. That this character, or this object called Satan, took him to a high point where he could see all the cities of the earth, and said, "I can give you all of these." Now you can only see all the cities of the earth from at a time, from space, and so this thing that actually must have had to have taken him up into space. So in a way, that's a little bit of evidence that, amongst a lot of other evidence, that does actually point to some veracity in Nigel's thesis about what was happening with the Greys. But as he says, it's you can see it as a metaphor for the how is our existence as humanity? What could threaten it? And one thing that could threaten it is our headlong rush into technology that makes us forget who we are, what we are as human beings, so that we lose sight of that, and we try to end up with a planet just peopled with machines rather than living beings. And I think that, to me, that's the point about what the man on the shroud was showing, is another way that's opposite to that. That like you said about, and again, I'm really sorry if this sounds religious, but to me, it's not religious. This is science and mathematics. He was talking about don't put your focus and your intentions upon things that break down. He was talking about entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. He was talking about rust breaking things down. He was talking about moths eating things away and thieves coming and taking them away. What's the thieves coming to take it away? This is actually, interestingly, that fits with the title of Nigel's book, of the kind of threats that you can face in this universe that Nigel was referring to. Now, he said, he was suggesting, don't stick yourself to this universe with all these threats, but find another way where things last, where you can last forever, where there's no moths and no rust and no thieves, where you can actually be eternal beyond limit. And perhaps if we do that, if we can do it enough, then perhaps we're able to do just as he promised. We can do exactly what he did, and we can actually break free of this restriction that makes us keep having to come back here. And interestingly, this is an idea that has been around for thousands of years. Even before Jesus, the idea that we're stuck in this wheel, the cycle of rebirth, and that the way to get past it is to stop being limited to our restricted selves, our egos, if you like, and find the compassion that you discover through realizing that everyone is you, that all human beings and all sentient beings fundamentally are one, and that anything that happens to any of them is like happening to you. So that the best way to help yourself is to help others to. And in the example that Yeshua himself gave, that was when he was asked to sum up. And I'm in a way, it's though it's sad to think about the situation that he was put in where he was asked this question, but that he was asked that question so that he's given us the answer to it. What when he was asked by, I think it was by Zara, what's your aim? What's your mission? What are you trying to do here? And he said, I was born for one reason and one reason only, to bear witness to the truth. So he wasn't there to start a religion. He wasn't there to make followers or to get praise or to get people to thank him or to ask his forgiveness or anything like that. He just simply came in a neutral sense, like a good scientist would, if you like, to actually point out, look, this is what sense shows you. This is what reason points to. Everything in this world is breaking apart. It doesn't last. All of you can see, even 2,000 years ago, people could see that they die. Their bodies don't go on forever. So is there another way that we can go on forever? And this is what he was addressing, this idea that there's another way beyond the physical. And interestingly, in terms of this continuance past death, there are many references to reincarnation that are there in the New Testament. Apparently, there was this wife of a Roman emperor, and as you may know, the Roman Empire sort of tried to take over the teachings of Jesus and tell people a particular interpretation of it that they had to believe. And this Roman emperor's wife was apparently told by a soothsayer that she'd been a witch in a past life. And so she said her husband, her name was Theodora apparently, I think her husband was Emperor Justinian, you have to take out all references to reincarnation. Well, they didn't quite manage all of them, because if you look in the New Testament, then people were saying, but how can the Messiah have come when people know that before the Messiah comes, Elijah will come back? And Jesus says to them, well, Elijah has been, but you knew him not. You didn't recognize him. And then the text says that they understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. Now, what does that mean? How can Elijah, who was someone who had lived 1,000 years ago, have come back as John the Baptist, unless reincarnation is true? And it's in all the religions. Every single one of them at some point have, of course, the Hindus and Buddhists and I think the Sikhs and some others still do, still hold to this concept of reincarnation. It's been there in all of them, and it would make perfect sense in terms of how we continue. But what I believe people like Jesus and the Buddha and people like Muhammad and Abraham and Zoroaster and many others have, and possibly some of the, I'm sure the ancient Hindu teachers as well, were pointing to, is that there's a way that we can live our lives that means that we don't have to ever come back into this world again. That we can escape to a universe where there's no suffering, there's no pain, there's no disease, there's no old age. That you can be forever in a perfect sense of complete knowing. And that it's not something that is granted to you by a God who's handing out rewards and punishments. That actually we ourselves, all individual beings, are that God in potential. And all we have to do is realize that potential, and then we don't get granted it by God. We become God, if you like. And this is this idea that that Jesus was saying, "My Father and I are one and the same." But he referred to him as our Father. He was talking. He was saying that he was everyone's Father. So he wasn't, I believe, trying to set himself up as someone to be worshipped. Quite the opposite. He was trying to show every single human being what they were capable of, that they can do, and he even said as much, word for word, that anything that he does, that they can do also. And that, for me, is the wonder of this object in Turin. I've seen it twice now. I saw it in the exposition, I think was in 97 or 98, and then again in 2010. It's really, it is awe-inspiring. There's nothing like it. No other object in our world that even comes close. That something that has been around for 2,000 years has something on it that modern science can't make. And actually, it's just, for me, it's incredible that incredible in the sense of amazing, not unbelievable, that this actually it has a connection back to this historical person who did and said all these things. And many of the scientists who study the Shroud and have studied the Shroud have been skeptics. The original Shroud of Turin research project, a lot of them, like me, they were Jewish. They had no axes to grind about saying, this is the founder of the church or anything like that. They were just looking at it as scientists, just as I've done. And you just, the more you study it, you just can't help but come to the conclusion that this thing is genuine. It's actually it's not made by human hands as in painted, but it is made by humanity, by the ultimate potential of humanity that any of us can achieve. And so I never cease to be fascinated by it.
Yeah, I mean, do you see that there's elements in the scientific community or even religious groups that might not want to endorse the Shroud of Turin? It could be a threat to certain people's beliefs.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's quite possible. But if anyone comes at me with any criticism or evidence against the Shroud, then I have to be careful to try to be objective and not say, "Oh, you're just saying that because you're, coming from this particular point of view, or you're a part of this group, or you wouldn't want it to be true." I always, the safe way for me to look at this, I think, is to just consider the points that they're making in reason, and see if they contradict what I'm saying. If they show me that actually, that I'm completely wrong, then I have to, put my hand down and say, yeah, I was wrong. But if not, if I can answer their points and they can't logically or rationally find fault in what I'm saying, then I don't mind that they don't agree with me. In fact, I think they're and I hope this doesn't sound patronizing, because they can not agree. They're blessed. They have free choice. That's what makes human beings so special. They don't have to all believe a certain thing or do a certain thing. They're demonstrating to me the grandeur of their humanity by deciding to take a point of view, whether it's right or not. And if I think it's not right, then the onus is on me to try and show rationally why it's not right. So yeah, possibly that some people might have vested interest to want it to be false or true, but for me, I just like to look at it as objectively as I can from a scientific sense, and just look at the points that people make, and without trying to cast aspersions on why they're making it. So far, though, the people who want to say it's a forgery, they just haven't come up with anything that makes any sense, because it can't be done now. And the people who say it can, they can't actually produce the evidence that it can. not with all the characteristics, distance coded information, only there on the surface fibers and so on and so on and so on, and all the details and everything.
Yeah. So where's it going now? Is there like a crescendo building in the awareness of the Shroud? Because at one point it was spread across all the news and everyone was made aware of the Shroud of Turin, and then it kind of disappeared off the radar for a while. And I guess people like yourself have never really let it go, have you?
And that's right. Yeah. But I think the expositions of the Shroud that happened around the turn of the millennium have sort of, in a sense, brought it back to public awareness. And I think as I was referring to earlier, the great work of Benford and Marino, Sue Benford sadly passed away a few years back after they published their research, but Joe Marino is still going, and he's got all the evidence to back him up, basically, that the carbon dating was flawed. And even one of the researchers from the Oxford Radiocarbon Lab himself is saying that, no, actually, I think we need to do more tests, because it just can't be right. It can't have been medieval, because how could it have been? It goes against all the other evidence about the Shroud to say that, and he wants more work to be done. Unfortunately, the current custodians of the Shroud in the that part of the Catholic Church that deals with it, they called back all the samples that had been given out, and they're for the moment at least they're not sort of allowing further carbon testing to be done. What we scientists have suggested is that there are parts of because yes, it's true, it is a destructive process to do carbon dating, but there are bits of the cloth that don't bear image and that lie, for example, underneath the bits that were patched up, not the patches themselves, but the cloth that was underneath the patch, and things like that could be dated. Even I think someone was saying where it was burnt, that you've got a good source of carbon there that you could take out and date. And there's lots of things that could be done. But in the end, people say, well, what will it take to prove that it's genuine? I think if people really want to not believe it's genuine, then there's no amount of proof that can prevail upon them, because at the end of the day, as I was saying, people have the right and the capacity to choose to believe what they want to. And yes, they might try and counter that back and say, yeah, but we can't prove to you it's false despite all the evidence. Well, I mean, there isn't evidence that it's false. It was carbon dated, but the carbon dating has been shown and even accepted by this, eminent chemist I was talking about, Ray Rogers, and the chap from the radiocarbon lab at Oxford himself, who suggested that further work needs to be done. If it was forged, how was it forged? Why is there no paint or pigment in the actual image? And how was it done? I think this is one artifact in history that has one of the most amount of accumulated evidence in favor of it being genuine of any. I keep an open mind about it, but for me, it's so compelling, the evidence that this is actually genuine. And as I say, it's just awe-inspiring to me that such a thing exists as scientific evidence, that we can actually, we can see, we can measure, and we can verify. And whatever type of science we put on it, whether it's the botanist looking at the pollen, whether it's the forensic pathologist looking at it, the anatomist, the physiologists, the physicists, the textile experts, the statisticians looking at the radiocarbon evidence, and so on. Just at this one symposium that I went to, there were scientists from so many different fields of study, and historians as well. And apparently, the the shroud was in the earlier part of its life. There's some evidence to suggest that it was known as the mandilion. That it was actually folded over many times, and it was just the face that was visible, because it was forbidden in those times, in that culture, to have anything connected with a dead body, like a shroud of an imprint of a man. And so it's thought that that's where all the where this idea of what Jesus looked like, that it actually comes from the shroud, from what people saw on the shroud, that rather than the shroud being a copy done by an artist, when no artist even now knows how to do such a thing, that a lot of art is actually copied from that's where people get this idea of his features, and how his hair and his beard and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible. I mean, if you come across the accounts of Tibetan monks, in recent times that have allegedly sort of gone into a ball of light,
yes,
and then kind of ascended, if you like, out of our reality.
Yeah, they say that that some lamas, when they die, that they're not supposed to touch the body, and there are anecdotal reports that they're left alone in a hut, if you like, and that this hut starts to shine, and then when they come back, the body's gone. There's just they just find hair and nails and so on. I've read those reports. I don't know if they're true or not. They could be. I've got no reason to say they couldn't be. The thing about the shroud is, of course, that it's actually that this is verifiable. But the point is that, and I believe his whole point was that what he was showing was achievable by mankind, by anyone, that if we live up to our potential, we can do what he did. So I'm perfectly open to the possibility that human beings can do that. Whether they have and who has and who hasn't, I just wouldn't know at all. No way of judging that. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that we have to get to a state of enlightenment to do that? Or could people just achieve it by being kind? It's many spiritual people want to get to that state of enlightenment, don't they? They sort of become vegetarians, they live a more compassionate lifestyle. But it seems very hard in today's world to achieve that state, doesn't it?
Well, I think the point, as I understand it, of Jesus's life is that kindness, compassion, wisdom, these things, they are enlightenment. It's not a mantra that you repeat 1,000 times. In fact, he's quoted in the Gnostic Gospels, saying to someone who's talking about what should they be allowed to eat, and so on, and dietary laws and so on. He says, "Listen, it's not what goes into the mouth that corrupts you; it's what comes out of it."
That's very true.
I mean, I don't think there's a shortcut. I think the problem with our sort of our 20th century European or northwestern European culture, at least, is that we're looking for shortcuts all the time, quick fixes. We want the latest upload or the latest download of enlightenment and so on. And it's not a technique of a thing that you do. It's not something that a chant that you repeat. It's not what you eat. It's not how you walk. It's not how you dress. It's how you live. And it's how you recognize that your full potential and the potential, therefore, of all other beings. And if you do recognize that, you can't, like, rationally. Obviously, I'm not talking from personal experience here. I'm just just someone. I'm just sort of talking about this from an intellectual, rational point of view, not as an example of it by any means. But if we do recognize this, if we truly recognize it, then we won't be able to help but actually become it, if you like. You would have to be compassionate once you know that your neighbor is yourself, because how can you want to just keep things for yourself when you realize yourself is everyone? And so, in a sense, that's where enlightenment lies, if you like. And I think it gave a clue to it. The idea that it comes with unionizing. If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. That when we divide and we make separate, then we're putting darkness into the equation, and lack of sense, lack of feeling, lack of knowing. But and this is another analogy that I really like that was in this manuscript I spoke about that Nigel wrote, that he talks about. Imagine a person standing in a plain, in a savannah, if you like, and they're looking out for threats that might come, predators or whatever. Well, the human eye can only see 120 degrees around us. That's a fact of biology, if you like. So what's the best way to be able to see 360? And he points out, of course, as I'm sure many of your listeners realized much more quickly than I did when I first read this, that actually, if you have people standing together, then they can be each other's eyes. They can share what they know and what they see and what they're aware of to help see the threat before it comes. By cooperation, by caring, by compassion, by thinking not just of what helps the self, but what helps the others. But and in doing that, that's actually the best way of helping yourself. You know, survival of the fittest, as Darwin pointed out, is a very apt way of understanding evolution. But the problem is that survival in physical terms of separated individuals ultimately means that the insects will survive better than we do, that a cockroach will survive a nuclear war, whereas as human beings won't. And rocks can be there for hundreds of millions of years. So the end product of it is actually evolution means we're devolving, we're becoming less, which is why Neanderthals had bigger brains than us and they were before us, and they weren't as primitive as people thought. In fact, recent research has shown that they had practices where they buried their dead and so on. Well, I mean, if that's the case, that we're actually through evolution we're actually becoming less as we become fitter to survive physically. Well, actually, if we want to think of how to survive eternally, then perhaps that's the way that we need to do it. Is we have to undo those restrictions and see past these narrow ways of looking. That it's our inner sense of knowing is the same in all of us. What fills that sense is different from each person, and here the physical senses come into it, the eyes and ears, and it's with our eyes that we see differences, and we see different nationalities and colors, and then we build up prejudices about this one's better than that one, which is worse than the other one, and all of that kind of nonsense, and we build up this ignorance, and then people start to live out of that ignorance as though it's fact, and the ignorance begets more ignorance, and this is the law of diminishing returns, if you like, that can actually mean that as a species we end up on the brink of annihilation, whether it's through global warming or nuclear war or biological chemical warfare. All of these things are just simply symptoms of the fact that we've forgotten what a human being is and how much they matter, and that corporations are chasing profits and instead of thinking about the people that they're affecting and so on. And that's another interesting example, because in law a corporation has more rights than a person has, although it's not even a person. But I mean, so to actually I think what all of the great teachers, like the Buddha, when he was talking about enlightenment, I don't think he was talking about taking yourself away and just and cogitating. That he did that to recognize what he had to do, but then what he had to do, he felt, was he had to develop compassion and wisdom. Those are the sort of fundamental tenets of Buddhism. And if you have compassion, then you will actually do things. If you see someone who is has fallen over on the ground, you won't just give them a lecture about how they're only suffering because they've chosen to be physical. You'll put your hand down and you'll lift them up. And actually. I saw a Lama do that once in Nepal. Actually, of a crowd of people, he was the first one to actually to actually help this old lady up who was struggling to walk. There are examples of good and bad in all religions, and I was talking in negative terms about some aspects of what has been done in the name of the Catholic religion, for example, and yet they had such great people as Francis of Assisi, and I have to be grateful to them that they've actually kept the shroud safe all these for so many centuries. So there's good or bad, there's good and bad in all. So I shouldn't cast aspersions against any, and try to see. I like to try to see the positives in all of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess when you think about the game that we're playing, from going from unity into this kind of duality to experience separation, everything's been set up this way by us, this consciousness, to in order to experience the separation. So if we want to get out of it, then we have to figure it out, as Jesus did.
I think that we've sort of set it up in the sense of making the arena of separation, but the details, if you like, that this, because it's chaos, you get this idea of the butterfly flapping its wings, making a storm halfway across the world, and the butterfly may have chosen to flap its wings. It didn't choose to make the storm because it didn't know it was going to make the storm, and that's the thing about chaos, that I believe ultimately the primary causation for everything that is and that is not has to come down to free choice, yay or nay, plus or minus, but we haven't actually chosen necessarily the specifics. And so also one thing that I don't like, that in some people's sort of, if you like, the European interpretation of Hinduism or Buddhism, that that people think, oh, everything is as it is for a reason. If someone's in poverty or starving, that's what they have chosen, and blah 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 blah, and it's meant to be. I really can't buy that one. I think what the architecture, if you like, of our lives and our destinies, we make them ourselves, but we also influence others, and in that sense are influenced by others, and it's not all deliberate, but where we can use what's deliberate is in recognizing the lines that bring together, the lines that care, and actually sort of, as I say, casting aside this ignorant way of thinking, which is interestingly is quite similar to what a researcher called McLean, and this is something else that was quoted by Nigel in one of his books, talking about the triune brain, that actually we contain in the middle of our brain something that's very similar to what reptiles have as their brain. And this is actually can be shown that the electrical activity there is associated with the sort of territoriality and aggression and tribal identity, and what's mine is mine, what's ours is ours, what's yours is what's yours is mine as well, but what's mine isn't yours. This kind of nationalistic type thing, where people want to go to war and so on, and to defend their little lump of rock that they're standing on. It all points to a very low form of life, which we may become as human beings if we follow those momentums to their logical conclusion. Because interestingly, it's been shown that the other part of our brain, the cerebral cortex, or the neocortex, we only seem to use a very small proportion of it, and if in fact about 90% of it isn't actually essential, as has been found by research on kids with hydrocephalus who have got first-class degrees with only 10% of their brain intact. And what that suggests is that in the past, our ancestors may have used more than we're using now, so that as we've become more, if you like, technological, we're not becoming wiser. We're actually becoming more narrow, if you like, and we're we can just see a little analogies of it in day-to-day life. If you look at how kids don't play anymore, they don't play games with each other. They play on their machines and their computers, and they don't make up stories and use their imagination. It's all it's all binary machines and so on. That actually we're using our minds and our inventiveness and our imaginations less rather than more. And of course, technology it leads eventually to things like atom bombs, which can have the potential to wipe us out completely as a species. And so I think there were, some scientists at the start of all of this kind of rush into technology who stepped back a moment and recognized this. People like Einstein and Oppenheimer, who writing letters to presidents. You've got to stop this. You can't. I know we were instrumental in helping it happen, but we now see that it's not. Humanity doesn't have a future with this type of thing. That we have to. If we're going to survive, what we have to discover is not how to get to Mars or how to send a robot into the gas of Jupiter and how to make a seventh generation phone that can download this and that. What we need to do is think, hang on a minute, what are we as human beings? How do we come to be? What is our potential? How are we less than that? Why are we less than that? And how can we get it back again? And for me, that's what this wonderful object, the shroud, is the great clue to. That it's all about recognizing in each and every human being, however much money they have or don't have, however prestigious they're thought to be or not be, whatever country they come from, whatever race they have, whatever religion they have or don't have, that just to be a human being, they have more potential, more value than the whole of a physical universe without sentient beings would have. In fact, this limitless thing that's more than 13 billion light years across, this whole physical universe doesn't come up in its significance to any one human being. And I think that the thing about, I'm just sort of saying this as words. The thing about people like Jesus and Buddha is that they actually recognized it in their lives, and that's the challenge for all of us, to try to see whether, if we want to see whether we can actually try in our own little ways to follow that example. And of course, they pointed out that actually it is possible, that there's no limit to what we can achieve. And you're giving examples of perhaps other individuals that may have done what he did. Yes, I as I say, I don't know if they did or not, but that's, to me, is the whole point, is that humanity is capable of that the shroud isn't to put him on a pedestal to be worshipped, that it's for us to put our own humanity on a pedestal, to respect ourselves, and therefore to have a huge reverence towards all other human beings, to realize that each of them is a potential one of him, if you like. Each human being is capable of doing what he did, and if we realize that enough, and if that idea were taught in schools, if you like, so that people, it would be very difficult for I don't know about people becoming vegetarians, but I think there would be a lot of people who wouldn't want to take part in murder or killing people. There would be a lot more peace in the world if we all realised our common humanity enough.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of distractions with technologies, isn't there, like with TV and computers, although we're using computers here right now, and it's a positive thing. But when we had snow a couple of weeks ago, first time in ages that neighbours were talking to each other, coming out to dig people's cars out of snow. It sort of built a kind of world War II type spirit where people come out and help each other.
Absolutely. And it shows there is that side to people that fundamentally, once you take away all this noise and distraction, that there is this side to us that points to where we've come from, that actually most people, if someone falls down right next to them, that before they even have time to think about it, whether they're going to get sued for trying to help or whatever, they will bend down and they will help that person up. There is that positive side to people.
Yeah, and it's kind of a natural instinct, isn't it, that we're just so distracted normally from who we truly are. And sometimes I wonder, is that by design, because there are groups and people here that want to keep power, if you like, and so things are maybe designed that way to keep us all asleep.
Yeah, well, it's if you like the two sides of things that Nigel talks about, the artificial against the natural, the artificial side of it, the technology, because we get so practiced in thinking along those lines that we forget that's how this madness, this idea that people have, that we became self-aware once we had language for self-awareness, or that you can download your mind into a machine and then you might as well die because you're in the machine. It's this immense ignorance that any child can see is nonsense, and anyone with any rational bone in their body can see as nonsense, and yet people believe it. But I think the whoever is propagating it, and whether it's deliberate or whatever their motives are, as I was saying at the start about whether people believe or don't believe in the shroud, the point is to look at the points that they're making and see whether they make sense. And I would argue that this idea of praising artificiality for itself, it has its uses. I mean, I use technology in medicine, all the time. But if it ever takes over so that you forget that the patient is a human being, then you've lost. You might as well give up, really.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew, for coming on.
My pleasure.
We'll wrap it up there. Certainly food for thought there with the Shroud of Turin, and also all the other stuff that you said as well. You've got some true spiritual concepts there that people can really take away and evaluate their lives really from. So I thank you again for coming on. You've been a wonderful guest.
It's been my pleasure. You've been a great interviewer. Thank you. I enjoyed that a lot.
Thank you.